Hello. Thanks for joining us or listening to us today. Um, I'm Ali Ponton from Viewpoint Research, and I'm here with Danny Sherwood from Co-Create. Um, and today we'd just like to pass on a few thoughts and insights around the subject of building trust with tenants, particularly through the development of more inclusive tenant involvement. So, firstly, I wanted to set out why inclusive tenant involvement is so essential. But the main point, or the first point certainly, is that the regulations require it. We've referenced here the regulator of social housing transparency, influence, and accountability standard from April this year. And this standard talks of taking tenant views into account, recognizing the diverse needs of tenants, treating tenants with fairness and respect, and communicating effectively with them. And finding effective ways of inclusive tenant involvement tackles all of these points. So it's really important in that respect. Um, Also, it is of course important to not just hear from those that it's easiest to engage with, and often those who don't speak up have the greatest challenges. Um, and also, a point that is often lost is that greater learning comes from new relationships and interactions. So again, that's different voices can give you new perspectives, different perspectives. So making sure involvement is inclusive, capturing all those voices is really essential.
So how do we make our involvement as inclusive as possible? Something that comes up a lot is trust, that there's often not enough trust, especially with groups of people who've had difficult experiences in the past, which might be with you, but quite likely is with different housing provider, different public service. We work within a context, unfortunately, where there's a lot of inequalities in our society, and a lot of people haven't been given good reasons to trust services, and so naturally are unlikely to want to get involved. So we're going to be thinking practically today about different ways of developing this trust. The three areas we'll be looking at. The first is meeting regulatory requirements in partnership with your tenants. So taking these things that we need to do anyway and using them as an opportunity to really involve tenants more, collaborate together. Second is offering diverse and meaningful involvement opportunities. So not expecting everyone to fit into the way that we choose to do things, but finding different ways. And if we're not managing to involve people, taking it upon ourselves to think of how else we could do that. And then finally, thinking about how we can demonstrate the impact of involvement through evaluation and then share that with staff, with tenants, also with partners in the wider systems in which we work. I'm going to hand over to Ali to tell you a bit about Viewpoint Research.
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, so just as I said before, I'm Ali from Viewpoint Research. Just to quickly set out who we are. So we're an independent research agency specializing in housing and tenant surveys, and we've had 16 years now of delivering tenant satisfaction surveys. We capture data online and by telephone, but we very much believe in talking to people, capturing stories and not just metrics. So really understanding the reasons behind the metrics and understanding, really listening to what people have got to say. It gives much greater insight into what you can action. And also, we're a social enterprise, so we've got a social mission to create sustainable, enjoyable jobs for people who have barriers to work, such as disability or people who are long-term unemployed. So we're very much around creating those opportunities. And our research team, 80% of our research team would fit under that definition. So moving on to the points that I'd like to make today, and the overall arching theme here is maximizing value of the TSMs. So we believe there's an opportunity around the TSMs to maximize building trust with tenants. So the TSMs, the tenant satisfaction measures, are a mandatory requirement coming out of the social housing white paper. They're designed to give greater accountability and ensure that the voice of the tenant is heard. They ensure a level of tenant engagement and that key areas are measured. But we wanted to ask, could you maximize this opportunity further to generate even greater trust amongst your tenant group as well? So for example, could you get tenants involved in the delivery of the TSMs? How could you do that? Maybe through helping to publicize them, helping to raise awareness of them. Could they be involved in the co-design of them? For example, although the TSM, the questions are fixed, there is flexibility around the methodology. Could tenants be involved in choosing the most suitable methodology for that tenant group, for that area? Could they even be involved in interviewing, in delivering the survey? Some interesting questions. Whether thinking about how tenants could most be involved, because if I believe that if the TSMs, they're an opportunity, and if they're to create the most value for your organization, then tenants really need to buy into them, understand how they will be used, and really trust that process. And having fellow tenants involved will help that process. So if people know that tenants have been involved in the design of them, or the design of the delivery of them, or in the actual delivery of them, or are talking about them, raising awareness of them, it becomes less about us and them, and much more of a collaborative process, and not a process that happens to them. And on the slide there, about the tenant voice, tenant involvement in the process will really bring all these aspects to the fore. So accountability, openness, honesty, and of course trust that we've mentioned a lot. So it's inclusive tenant involvement in the delivery of this could really bring it back to those standards that the regulator is looking for, that we talked about at the start. Next slide, please, Danny. So just want to give an example of some thoughts around sort of a local model. So I'm a big advocate for social enterprise. Believe it's a better way of doing business. And the TSMs are an opportunity to build something locally that creates social value. As I mentioned, the allowed methodology of the TSMs is broad, and in-house options are allowed. You can outsource or do it in-house. So could you use this as an employment opportunity for tenants? And also, if done this way, would it arguably be a better mode of delivery? Tenants better understand the language in the area. They'd have better acknowledgement or empathy around local issues, and often and quite possibly have greater reach in being able to contact people, know how to get hold of people in the area. And if not for the TSMs, it might be that you feel that's too small or it's too fixed as it is. Maybe there's opportunities for tenant involvement in other interactions, maybe through transactional surveys that you do with, for example, with repairs or other areas, or any other consultations, perhaps about new initiatives in the area. Could these consultations be led by tenants rather than be something that's not so much imposed on them, but something that doesn't have their involvement? And I think such a model, I mean, we've got experience of that local model being used for the TSMs. And we really believe that it enables better delivery, but it also creates local opportunities for people. And I think has a good, really, like I say, coming back to the main theme, really creates greater trust amongst the tenant group. So just last slide for me. So what next? So we've suggested how such a model may look, or some of the areas you might want to think about, but it inevitably be different in all areas, and there'll be different opportunities in different areas. But I think if you can see the value in getting tenants involved in something like the TSMs, might be something else, then really the next step, I would think, would just be to talk to people in the area, talk to community partners. those that have a focus on employment, and those that deal with research. Talk to them, find out what could you build together. Work with current providers. Is there a training opportunity for tenants, for example, with current providers, and include something around social value, something around a local model in your TSM tenders or your other tenders, for example. See what suggestions people come back with. It may be that when you put the question out there, that the ideas are generated that would work within your area. So it's very much just a few ideas to get you started, and it might seem daunting to deliver something that is traditionally quite linear, such a satisfaction surveys traditionally done in quite a linear way, to deliver them in quite an innovative way. But I would just suggest talk to partners, see what ideas people have, see what can be done, and how greater trust, greater tenant involvement can be created. So over to you, Danny.
Thank you. So just going to start by briefly saying who Co-Create are. So we're a collective of staff and freelance associates. We've got decades of experience between us involving the public, and many of us bring lived experience to our work. So, for example, I've done lots of co-production work as an expert by experience, bringing personal experience of disability to other organisations. We've also been working professionally in co-production and especially health for the past 12 years or so. So we support services of different sorts to make involvement accessible and effective. So we're always really focused on, one is being very realistic about what we can do within pressured public services, and two is about being effective and moving towards change. And we do this through training, facilitation, and consultancy. So the following, I'm going to talk about kind of 3 ways from our experience that we can help to build trust with tenants. And this comes from this kind of engagement, involvement, co-production, co-creation, all these things we've been doing in different spaces over the past 7 years. So the first thing I wanted to think about was showing diverse tenants why we want to hear from them. So a common problem in involvement work is that we don't hear from everyone we want to hear from, and there's often certain groups of people that we really need to hear from. You don't get involved so much. Maybe that's defined by gender, ethnicity, whatever it is in your area. So if we're going to get people more involved, something that we often hear is that people really want to know, why do you want to hear from them? So it's not just about box ticking. So for example, I have a long-term health condition. If I'm involved in something, I want to know, it's not just because you've got a disability box you need to tick, but what value do you feel that someone with a disability can bring to this kind of thing? And it's really helpful with those messages to have a rationale, to be able to explain to people, why do we want to hear from you? So these are 3 rationales you might think about using in your context, which we found useful. The first is thinking about people you've heard less from previously. So if you've done involvement in the past and you've noticed patterns, then you can say, okay, well, what we're doing at the moment is kind of filling some of these gaps. So maybe we've heard more from people who are a bit older and want to hear more from people who are a bit younger. So that's our focus at this point in this context. The second is thinking about who is represented already. So that incorporates what we might think about in the first option, but also thinking about staff in your organisation. So there might be certain demographics that are really well represented within your organisation, and you decide actually we don't need to hear from so much. So say if like a lot of organisations, there are educated white men in senior positions, we might decide that actually we've heard quite a lot from educated white men, and therefore we're going to focus on some different groups of people who haven't been able to kind of bring their priorities into the way that we work. And then finally, and this is something we use a lot, is something called the curb cut effect. So the idea here is that If you think about a drop curve in a pavement, the idea is that people with mobility issues, especially people who need wheelchairs, mobility scooters, and so on, are able to get on and off pavements more easily. But they also support lots of other people. So you have parents with buggies and prams that they need to get over, and you have people with trolley cases, and there's just generally it's nice to have that kind of easier route. And what that leads us to is thinking about whatever the thing is we're focusing on, who has the biggest challenges in this area, and what can we do with them that we can therefore assume will kind of cascade out and support other people. So there's a link on the slide. We'll share these slides if you would like to read into that further. But so that's the first area. Second area is thinking about the methods we use to involve people and kind of thinking about the message that underlies the method. So what is it telling people about how we feel about their input, how we value it when we involve people in different ways? So you might have seen a ladder of participation at some point somewhere. The idea is that we move from where we've got these white boxes. On this side, we're thinking more about things where tenants are, we make decisions and we communicate them to tenants. So for example, providing information, we decide what's important and we tell tenants what they need to know. As we move through to doing for, engaging consulting, that's when we're asking people, what do they think, kind of gathering their views. But it's doing for because we then take their views away and we work out what to do with them and we decide whether we've succeeded and so on. And then when we move through to doing with, that's co-design, co-production, these kind of approaches where we really involve people in finding solutions together. And so the point of a ladder like this is not to say that some of these are right and some of these are wrong. It's just to highlight the difference, the level of kind of power or agency that tenants have when we choose different methods. And we've really often seen really lovely things happen as we move from doing for to doing with. And when we do, for example, co-design workshops, having people say things like, no one's ever asked me these kind of questions, no one's ever spoken to me like this before. It's a really, really powerful thing, and it really shows that we're valuing people in a different way. We can also apply this to evaluation. And something we noticed at Co-Create a few years ago was that we'd do some really collaborative co-design work, and then we'd use a more traditional evaluation style that kind of moved all the decisions back into being decided by us or the services that we're supporting. And so we started to look at evaluation methods where we're doing with, not doing for, and especially thinking about the outcomes for our evaluations. So who gets to decide what is important, what is a meaningful outcome, what is success against that outcome. So thinking of ways of involving tenants in those kind of decisions. And again, doing this kind of shows people that we really value how you see things is not just about you kind of fitting into the way that we want to work. And so when we have our evaluation, we have some kind of understanding of the outcomes and the impact of what we've done. We want to think about how we let people know. And this is something that we often see can go missing or can happen in a way that doesn't do the job as well as it could be done. So keeping people informed, closing the loop, it's sometimes called. First thing we often see is that. So say you've gone out and you've done some engagement, you've worked out what you need to do about something, and you kind of get on with doing it. People often feel that we'll get back to people and let them know you kind of want to have made a big change. So you've gone away and you've had the time to work things out and to implement it. And it'd be really lovely if whenever we were working with tenants, we're able to kind of come back to them quickly and say, we made a huge set of changes. You're going to see these in your interaction with us and so on. In practice, that's not usually how things work. We might need to be looking at funding, involve different people, work with partners, is going to have to compete with different priorities, and so on. And that can knock our timescales way out from kind of personal timescales. So if I share personal stuff with you as part of your work, I kind of want to know that's going to make a difference. So I don't want to wait 12 months to hear that something's going to happen. So we advise people to get back quickly and move. Don't focus so much on a you said we did model, but a you said we're doing. So you get back to people and you say, we've heard this from you, so we're doing these things. And it might be this thing is sitting with this steering group, or we're doing some further engagement around this. But just really letting people know that how much you value what they've done and that you're taking the next steps. The second thing that I think can be really valuable is, of course, we want to share with participants in our involvement what we've done, but also sharing it much more widely with all of your tenants, with staff across the organisation, with your partners and local communities, and really kind of demonstrating the value of what you're doing. But this is also really good marketing for future involvement. So when you show people that being involved does actually make a difference, things change, and encourage people to get involved that wouldn't have done before. And then finally, inviting further communication. So we want to make it clear to people that it's not just a case of we drop in to get some information when we've got a problem we need to solve, but we're kind of building relationships. This is an ongoing thing. And that is a really important element of trust, that people, that there's that kind of feeling of a bit of a sharing of power. And we often see really wonderful changes where people start to build up those kind of those two-way conversations, and people really feel like they're a kind of they're a part of something rather than just a source of information. There's lots more I'd like to say on all of those things, but we wanted to keep today brief. So I'm going to pass on to Ali to talk about how you can get in touch with us.
Thanks, Danny. Well, thanks everyone for listening, for watching. Hope you found it useful. Hope there's some stuff there that's thought provoking. We'd really welcome any questions or thoughts from you. We're really interested in what you've got to say, and either of us would be very pleased to continue the conversation and chat to you further. Absolutely. So please do get in touch. Our details are on the screen, both for Co-Create and for Viewpoint, for Danny and I. And yeah, thanks very much. Hope you found it useful.
Thanks, everyone.